All right, let's cut the crap and dive headfirst into this shitstorm U.S. sanctions on Iran. You're probably thinking, why the hell should I care?
Well, everyone should care. This shit affects everything.
Okay, fair enough. But seriously, why should we give a damn about some sanctions on a country halfway across the world?
Because, my friend, this is about way more than just Iran. We're talking about decades of economic warfare, a global power struggle with Iran caught in the crosshairs. It's a total clusterfuck that affects the entire world, and it helps explain why shit's so fucked up.
Okay, I'm listening. So rewind back to 1979, disco was dying, and the U.S. Embassy in Tehran got stormed. That's where this whole clusterfuck began, right?
Got it. The Iranian Revolution and that whole hostage crisis were a major turning point. President Carter froze Iranian assets billions of dollars and slapped on a trade embargo.
Damn, talk about a cold shoulder. So, no more Persian rugs for America.
Pretty much, they were cut off. And it wasn't just Carter. This sanctioned shitstorm became a favorite pastime for U.S. presidents.
So every president since then has piled on.
You got it. Reagan, Bush Sr., Clinton, Bush Jr., Obama, Trump, and even Biden. They all had their own flavor of fuck you to Iran.
So this whole sanctions thing has been a bipartisan clusterfuck from the get-go.
Pretty much.
Okay, so let's break it down. What did these different presidents actually do? I mean, besides throwing shade on Twitter.
Well, Reagan piled on an arms embargo in '83, and by '87 he'd escalated to full-blown economic warfare, cutting off goods and services. Then Clinton came along in '95 and really cranked up the pressure, targeting Iran's oil industry, which was a major blow to their economy. He also signed the Iran and Libya Sanctions Act, IELSA.
IELSA. Sounds like a bad case of financial herpes. What the hell did that do?
Think of it this way. You want to build a refinery in Iran. Boom. IELSA hits you with massive fines and blocks you from doing business in the U.S. It was a way to isolate Iran from the global economy.
So from Carter to Clinton, it was like a game of sanctions limbo. How low can you go? But was there any let-up when Bush Jr. took office?
It's not a chance. Bush Jr. added his own twist, targeting specific banks with sanctions, making it almost impossible for Iran to access the international banking system.
So was all this just about punishing Iran, or was there, a bigger strategy at play? Were they trying to make them cry Uncle Sam?
It's always a mix of motivations. The official line was about Iran's nuclear program, support for groups like Hezbollah, and human rights violations, sure. But there's always a geopolitical angle. Iran was a major regional power, and these sanctions were a way to contain their influence.
Right, like a geopolitical dick-measuring contest.
You could say that. It was also about sending a message to the rest of the world. Don't mess with the U.S. or you'll be next.
Okay, so we've got this long history of piling on sanctions. Did Obama continue this trend, or did he try to, play nice?
Well, Obama actually tried a different approach. He signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, also known as the Iran nuclear deal, in 2015. This was a huge diplomatic win. Iran agreed to limit its nuclear activities in exchange for lifting some sanctions.
So a moment of sanity in this whole shit show?
It seemed that way. For a while, at least. Then Trump rolled in.
And we all know what happened next.
Yep. Trump pulled the U.S. out of the nuclear deal and slapped even more sanctions on Iran. He basically threw a wrench into the whole diplomatic process.
And pissed off a lot of our allies who supported the deal.
Absolutely. The EU was particularly furious and even tried to find ways to bypass the U.S. sanctions. They created something called Instex.
Instex? Sounds like a brand of condoms. What the hell is that?
It was the EU's attempt to create a financial system that would allow them to continue trading with Iran without getting hit by U.S. sanctions.
So it's like a global financial tug-of-war with Iran caught in the middle.
Exactly. And the consequences of all this are far-reaching. It's not just about politics and economics. It's about real people's lives.
Okay, so we've covered the history of this sanctions roller coaster. But what about the nuts and bolts? What did these sanctions actually look like?
Well, there's a whole alphabet soup of sanctions out there. IELSA, Kiatsa, and a bunch of others. It's like a complex web designed to squeeze Iran from every angle.
Let's break down this alphabet soup. We already touched on IELSA, but what about CASA? Does that stand for constantly attacking and totally screwing America? Because that's kind of what it feels like.
Not quite. CASA is the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. It was passed in 2017 and broadened the scope of sanctions even further.
So how does it actually work?
Well, it targets Iran's ballistic missile program, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and anyone involved in human rights abuses.
So it's basically saying, fuck you, Iran, and fuck anyone who even thinks about helping you.
It's certainly a very aggressive approach. And the thing is, sanctions often have unintended consequences.
Like what?
Well, They might start by targeting specific government entities, but the impact ripples outward, affecting ordinary people in ways you might not expect.
Okay, hold up. Before we get into how these sanctions are screwing over regular Iranians, let's take a quick piss break. We'll be right back to dive deeper into this shitstorm. All right, bladders emptied and bullshit detectors calibrated. Let's get back to this sanctions shitstorm. We were talking about how these sanctions, while aimed at the Iranian government, end up hitting regular people the hardest.
It's true. Think about the stuff you buy every day.
Booze and hookers.
Not quite. More like food, clothes, medicine, that kind of stuff. These things become way more expensive in Iran because of the sanctions.
So it's like trying to buy a decent burrito with a handful of pennies.
Kind of. The Iranian currency, the rial, has plummeted in value because of the sanctions. It makes imports super expensive.
Damn. That sucks. What else?
Well, travel is a nightmare.
Yeah, I hate getting stuck in the middle seat.
No, it's worse than that. Imagine trying to book a flight on an Iranian airline. You're basically playing Russian roulette with your life. Because of the sanctions, they can't buy new planes or get spare parts.
So they're flying around in these ancient, rickety death traps.
Pretty much.
Shit, that's terrifying. But seriously, what about healthcare? That's got to be fucked up.
It is. Sanctions make it incredibly difficult for Iran to import medicine and medical equipment.
So people are dying because they can't get basic treatments.
Yeah. We're not just talking about fancy experimental drugs. We're talking about insulin, antibiotics, things people need to survive.
This all sounds pretty damn bleak.
Yeah.
But are these sanctions actually working? Are they forcing Iran to change its ways? Or are they just making things worse?
That's the million-dollar question. It's a complex issue, obviously. There are arguments on both sides. Some argue that sanctions are necessary to pressure Iran into changing its behavior.
So like a tough love approach.
Yeah, something like that. You know, about their nuclear ambitions or support for groups like Hezbollah. But others argue that sanctions are counterproductive.
How so?
Well, squeezing a country economically just creates a siege mentality, and it might even make them more likely to lash out.
Like backing a rabid dog into a corner?
Exactly. It's a dangerous game. And it's important to remember that Iran isn't some monolithic entity.
Right. Not every Iranian is chanting death to America and twirling a nuclear warhead.
Right. These sanctions are affecting a diverse society with different political factions and viewpoints. Iran has a rich culture and history and a diverse population.
Okay, let's play what if. What if these sanctions actually work and Iran says, fine, Uncle Sam, we'll do whatever you want? What happens then?
That depends on what the U.S.'s goal is, right? Is it regime change? Is it forcing Iran to completely abandon its nuclear program?
Good point. It's not always clear what the end game is. It sometimes feels like we're just reacting to events.
That's a problem, because it creates uncertainty and instability, not just for Iran, but for the whole region.
Uncertainty is a breeding ground for conflict, for sure. So if these sanctions aren't working and we don't even know what we're trying to achieve, then what the hell are we doing?
That's what a lot of people are asking. It feels like we're stuck in this endless cycle of escalation.
Like watching two toddlers fight over a broken toy.
Exactly.
All right, enough doom and gloom. Let's talk solutions. Is there any way out of this mess?
Well, the most obvious first step would be to revive the nuclear deal.
But hasn't that ship sailed?
It won't be easy, that's for sure. But the alternative is continued escalation and the very real risk of military conflict.
Yeah, nobody wants to see mushroom clouds on their Instagram feed. So let's say we manage to get the nuclear deal back on track. What about all the other sanctions related to human rights, terrorism, and whatnot?
That's where things get even more complicated. Those sanctions are often tied to specific laws, and lifting them would require a much more comprehensive effort.
Right, those are some tough nuts to crack. But it seems like we need to start somewhere if we want to break out of this endless cycle of hostility. What are some other potential solutions?
Well, it's not just about governments and politicians. Civil society can play a role. Cultural exchanges, people-to-people diplomacy, these things can help foster understanding.
Right. Maybe instead of dropping bombs, we could drop some Persian rugs and a few kebabs.
It's about finding common ground, recognizing our shared humanity.
Okay, so we've explored the impact of sanctions, the effectiveness, and the hope that diplomacy might offer. But before we wrap up this part, let's take a step back. What does this whole Iran sanction saga tell us about America's role in the world?
That's the question we all need to be asking ourselves. Because how we handle this situation with Iran has implications way beyond the Middle East. It'll shape our relationships with allies, our credibility on the world stage, and who we are as a nation.
Deep shit, man. But that's why we do these deep dives, to grapple with the tough questions and hopefully come out a little bit wiser.
Exactly. It's about embracing nuance and complexity and recognizing that there are rarely easy answers.
All right, that wraps up part 2 of our deep dive into U.S. sanctions on Iran. We've explored this whole mess, the effectiveness of sanctions, and the hope that diplomacy might offer a way out.
But we're not done yet. In part 3, we'll delve into the ethical dilemma surrounding sanctions and explore some more solutions.
Stay tuned, folks. This deep dive is about to get even deeper. All right, you bastards, we're back for the final round of our deep dive into this whole U.S. sanctions on Iran shitshow. We've waded through the historical muck, untangled the web of sanctions, and even contemplated America's role in this whole geopolitical clusterfuck.
And if your brains aren't already fried, we're about to hit you with some final thoughts that might just leave you questioning everything.
Yeah, we're going to drop some truth bombs that'll blow your goddamn minds.
Okay, maybe not blow your minds, but at least spark some critical thinking.
Fair enough. So, let's bring this shit home. We've talked a lot about how these sanctions are screwing over Iran, but what about the blowback on the U.S.? Are we shooting ourselves in the foot with all this economic warfare?
It's a good question, and honestly, one that doesn't get asked enough. These sanctions have costs for the U.S. as well. They hurt American businesses.
You mean, like, besides the military-industrial complex?
Yeah, even beyond that. Think about it. Companies that could be doing legitimate business with Iran are losing out.
Yeah, like those poor bastards at Boeing watching billions of dollars in potential aircraft sales fly right past them.
Exactly. And it's not just about lost revenue. It's about our reputation, too.
Like we're the flaky friend who bails on plans at the last minute.
Kinda. When we impose sanctions unilaterally, especially after pulling out of agreements like the nuclear deal, it makes us look unreliable to other countries.
Right, because who wants to team up with a country that changes the rules whenever it feels like it? So it hurts business and our reputation. Anything else?
Well, there's also the moral question. I mean, we've talked about the humanitarian impact of sanctions on Iran, but it also raises questions about our own values.
Like, are we okay with hurting innocent people to achieve our political goals?
It's definitely a slippery slope, ethically speaking. It's a question we need to grapple with as a nation because, at the end of the day, our foreign policy should reflect our values, not just our interests.
All right, so we've established that sanctions have costs, both for Iran and the U.S. But what about the argument that sanctions are a necessary evil? You know, like when you're dealing with a truly rogue state.
It's a valid point. Sanctions can be a powerful tool. They can help isolate bad actors, disrupt illicit activities, and put pressure on regimes to change their behavior. But they should always be a last resort, not a first impulse.
Okay, so let's say we're in a situation where sanctions are the only option. How do we make sure they're actually effective and not just some empty gesture? Like, how do we make sure we're not just pissing in the wind?
Well, first, we need to have clear objectives. What are we trying to achieve with these sanctions? Regime change, policy shifts.
Because if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there, right?
Exactly. Without clear objectives, it's impossible to measure success or failure.
Okay, makes sense. What else?
Multilateral sanctions are always going to be more effective than unilateral ones. If you have multiple countries on board, it puts more pressure on the target, makes it harder to circumvent the sanctions.
Right, strength in numbers.
Yeah.
And what about diplomacy? I mean, sanctions can't be the only tool in our toolbox.
Of course not. We need to be willing to engage in dialogue, explore common ground, and find solutions that work for everyone.
All right, folks, that just about wraps up our deep dive into this whole U.S. sanctions on Iran mess. It's been a wild ride full of history, ethics, and enough geopolitical jargon to make your head spin.
But hopefully you learned something, or at least started to think a little more critically about this issue.
Because that's what this show is all about. We want you to walk away not just with more knowledge, but with a deeper understanding of how the world works and the power dynamics that shape our lives.
Exactly. It's about being informed and engaged.
So keep those bullshit detectors on high alert. And until next time, peace out.